Hey friends, tonight, let's explore the surprisingly exhausting life of a medieval goose herder. Yes, you heard that right. You, dear listener, are about to begin your day in the year 1347, where luxury has feathers and trouble hisses from the bushes. Welcome to your new job, where your coworkers all honk, your boss wears a velvet robe, and your mornings begin not with coffee, but with the screech of 30 irritable geese who all seem personally offended by your existence. So before you relax, take a second to like and subscribe if you find value in what we share. And if you're listening from somewhere oddly specific, like a goose farm in Nebraska or a quiet cabin in Denmark, let us know your location and local time in the comments. Turn down the lights, perhaps start a fan to create a soothing ambience, and join me as we slowly dive into tonight's story. You wake up before the sun does, not by choice, but because 30-something birds have decided it is time. They honk in unison, a chorus of nasal defiance that would put any modern alarm clock to shame. You rub your eyes and reach for your tunic, which smells faintly of feathers and stale pond. The ground beneath your straw mattress crunches with last night's droppings. Charming. Out you go into the foggy morning. The village is still asleep, but not you, not the goose herder. The geese waddle in chaotic zigzags, some pecking each other, others glaring at you like they remember what you did yesterday. You try to lead them around the stream instead of through it, you monster. You grab your goose stick, not a fancy staff. Mind you, just a long stick with a soft end for nudging, or occasionally defending yourself. Your employer, Lady Matilda of Brackenmere. She doesn't rise until well past the third bell, but she insists her geese must be walked fed and massaged into serenity before she drinks her morning broth. They are ornamental geese, you see, nobility's pets. They've never known the real pond or wild grass. They eat crushed barley and sleep on woven mats. One of them has a ribbon. Another wears a tiny copper bell. You try to corral them toward the pasture. They go in 12 different directions, like sentient balloons in a hurricane. You shout gently more, like pleading, but they respond by biting your calf. Again. There is a saying among goose herders: never turn your back on a gander named Hubert. You don't know who started it, but you believe it with all your soul. Hubert is massive, with a twisted wing that gives him a permanent gangster lean. He waits until your back is turned before charging. Always. It's not bravery. It's personal. You finally get them to the field. The sun is peeking over the thatched rooftops and you're already sweating. You check each bird, count the feathers well roughly, and make sure no one's limping or acting suspicious. Last month, one goose developed a limp, and Lady Matilda demanded a poultice made of marjoram, goat spit, and Latin prayers. You don't want to repeat. As the geese settle into nibbling grass and ignoring your existence, you sit on a rock and take out your breakfast, a hard crust of bread, and maybe a dried plum if you're lucky. One of the goslings eyes your plum. You eye it back. The standoff lasts longer than you'd like to admit. Medieval herding is not about prestige. It's about patience, resilience, and developing an uncanny sixth sense for when a goose is about to poop in your shoe. You become a reader of subtle cues, the way a goose tilts its head, the flutter of a wing, the pre-peck twitch. Also, geese remember things, especially slights, like that time you stepped on a foot by accident, or when you forgot to bring warm water in winter. They hold grudges with the passion of minor nobility denied inheritance. And here's the historical twist. In many medieval estates, geese weren't just livestock. They were indicators of status. The fatter and fluffier the bird, the more refined the house. Nobles paraded them, gifted them, even embroidered them on family banners. There was a countess who commissioned a portrait of her favorite goose dressed in pearls. The goose notably ate the pearls later. True story, debated, but often repeated. What's odder still is the whispered debate among scholars about whether goose herders had secret techniques to communicate with their flocks through rhythmic whistles or dance-like gestures. Some believe it was lost with time. Others say modern herders just don't dance enough. Regardless, you've got 8 more hours of goose wrangling ahead. You'll be elbow deep in feathers by midday. Someone will escape. Hubert will bite someone, likely you. But for now, the field is quiet. The geese are softly clucking. The air smells like hay and damp wings. And your left boot is only mildly soaked. You lean back, chew your bread, and think to yourself, this isn't so bad. Until a goose honks directly into your ear from behind. Congratulations, you've made it 37 minutes. Only 11 hours and 23 to go. Sleepy side note. In medieval, goose-related complaints, excessive honking during Vespers was apparently a documented grievance in a monastery record from Bavaria. You're not alone. Also, fun fact, one chronicler once claimed that geese honk in different regional accents. You're skeptical. But now you kind of want to listen closely tomorrow. Oh, and in case no one told you, never challenge a goose to a staring contest. You'll lose. Every time. Feathers and feudalism. The sun climbs higher, and your flock fans out like a badly rehearsed choir. Each goose picks its own patch of grass, but only after thoroughly judging the spot and you. You try to pretend you have control. You do not. They know. You know. The nearby sheep laugh silently. You shuffle after them with your trusty stick, which is more for show than function, kind of like a scepter for the least respected monarch in the kingdom. The geese wander in pairs, some honking in low gurgling tones, others occasionally flapping as if they've suddenly remembered they have wings, and a deep disdain for gravity, and that's when it hits you. These geese are noble property. You see, in feudal times, land wasn't just divided into manors and castles. It was also measured in the number of oddly pampered birds waddling across it. Geese were not simply poultry. They were political. A flock of well-fed, well-behaved geese signaled wealth control and the deeply confusing belief that a honking bird could elevate a family name. It sounds silly until you realize how seriously it was taken. In some estates, geese had names, servants, and dedicated coops with better insulation than the peasant cottages. One duchess even had her geese blessed by a local monk during Lent, which, when you think about it, was probably not what the church meant by spiritual outreach. You lead your birds past the edge of the field toward a narrow path that curves around Lady Matilda's rose garden. The rule is clear. Do not let the geese enter the roses. You failed this rule before. It ended in feathers, thorns, and a very loud complaint read aloud at court. So now you heard with precision, like a goose whisperer, a very nervous one. But what truly complicates your job is feudal hierarchy. These aren't just birds, they're above you in status. Legally, if someone harms one of Lady Matilda's geese, it's a worse offense than stealing a sack of flour. In one case, a servant was fined for stepping on a goose's foot. The bird was given fresh herbs and an apology. The servant had to kneel for forgiveness to the bird. And don't even think about eating one without written permission sealed in wax. The punishment ranged from hefty fines to being reassigned to pig mucking duty, which is about as glamorous as it sounds. You pause at a small stream so the geese can drink. Hubert, of course, attempts to drown himself heroically, for no reason other than to create drama. You intervene, gently nudge him back, and he hisses like you've insulted his ancestry. One passing knight riding through the trail actually slows down and bows to the geese. Not you, the geese. Why? Because those specific birds once walked in a ceremonial procession in honor of the Duke's wedding. They're practically minor celebrities. You, however, are still that person who tripped during the same event and landed face first in the marzipan swans. You sit by a stump and try to clean your boots. A few goslings gather around your feet, curious. They peck at your laces. You let them. It's oddly soothing. The eldest goose, named Beatrix Lady Matilda, insists gives you a look that says Don't get comfortable, peasant. Still, you can't help but marvel. These birds are cared for in ways most humans dream of. Their diet is seasonal. Their water is changed thrice daily. They're weighed weekly and groomed with brushes made of boar bristle. And when a goose sheds too much, Lady Matilda orders tiny linen vests sewn to keep them warm and presentable. You remember hearing a tale about a noble in Aquitaine who commissioned a goose-sized carriage for parades. Some say it had tiny wheels and curtains. Some say it's a myth. You desperately hope it's true. The weirdest thing, some lords believed geese had emotional intelligence. There are records of nobles consulting goose behavior before big decisions like early feathered oracles. If the goose refused food, they delayed travel. If the goose flapped twice and spun in a circle, probably meant bad weather or indigestion. Modern scholars love debating whether this was superstition or a misunderstood form of animal empathy. One theory suggests geese were so well attuned to their environment that their behavior did in fact warn of oncoming storms or disruptions. Another theory suggests nobles were just bored and needed an excuse to avoid decisions. Both seem plausible. You finish your route just as the castle bell chimes midday. The geese turn back toward home as if they understand the schedule better than you, which they probably do. You follow them in line, looking like the saddest parade in history, but at least no one's escaped. Yet, back inside the estate yard, Lady Matilda is sipping something in a goblet too large for her hands. She waves vaguely in your direction. You bow. The geese honk. She bows back again, not to you, just to Beatrix. As you lead the flock into their enclosure, you notice something odd. A velvet cushion missing. It was Hubert's favorite. You turn around slowly, and there he is dragging it through the mud like a royal protest. His eyes lock with yours. You both know this will not end peacefully. Sleepy Goose thought of the evening some medieval manuscripts depict geese with halos and religious art. Either someone was being very symbolic or very confused. Also, did you know there's an actual 14th century law in England that lists the price of a goose feather? For tax purposes, goose quills were a hot commodity. Imagine trying to explain that to a customs officer. And here's a sleepy smile for you. One herder once tied tiny bells to his geese to encourage musical harmony. It worked until they all walked into the chapel mid-mass. The geese, not the people. A cloak of down. It's mid-afternoon now, and you've herded the flock back behind their wooden enclosure. The geese are eating resting or planning their next mutiny. It's hard to tell. You're resting too, leaning against a post with the vague expression of someone who's been pecked 17 times before lunch. But you can't nap. No, not yet. Today is plucking day. Before you panic, no, it's not what it sounds like. You're not about to roast anyone. This is the noblewoman's favorite tradition, harvesting down feathers for pillows, cloaks, and ceremonial goose capes. Yes, cloaks made of goose fluff. Feathers were currency in their own right, soft, warm, and status-laced. Lady Matilda demands her bedding refreshed before the autumn feast. And you're the lucky soul with fingers just nimble enough to do it without starting a bird riot. You approach Beatrix first. She glares at you like she's already planning your downfall. Carefully, you sit-hum the silly tune she seems to tolerate and begin the most delicate of tasks, finding the underfeathers. These are not the stiff ones used for writing or quills. No, these are the plush tufts hidden beneath the outer armor, the cloud-like bits that made medieval sleep almost tolerable if you weren't sleeping on hay and existential dread. Plucking live geese wasn't always cruel. It was an art form. You only took a few at a time. You had to know the difference between a feather that's ready and one that'll earn you a honk of betrayal. The best herders could collect enough for a pillow without drawing blood or fury. The worst, well, there's a reason old Tomlin now works with beats. You gather the feathers into a linen pouch, each one lighter than regret. Some are cream-colored, others snow-white. A noblewoman once claimed she could tell the difference between spring down and late summer, down by touch alone. You don't doubt it. You just doubt her eyesight. And here's the twist. Feathers weren't just for fashion or bedding. They were taxable goods. Yes, lords would count bags of goose down among estate earnings. A high-quality pillow's worth could rival that of a small goat. In fact, a feather-filled mattress was considered a wedding gift worthy of royalty. Not that you'd know. Your bed is a wooden plank and an itchy blanket that smells like turnips. As you pluck and hum and occasionally dodge a flailing wing, you think about the peculiar prestige of softness in a world so hard. These people fought wars, built castles, dug ditches with sticks, but heaven forbid they sleep on anything less than goose feather clouds. Priorities. Oh, and don't forget the ceremonial cloaks. You've seen one. Lady Matilda's sister wore it once during a visit, a white cloak made entirely of layered feathers, draped dramatically over her shoulders, like she'd personally defeated winter. Everyone clapped. The geese, witnessing the scene, honked with what you can only describe as existential horror, possibly jealousy. There's an old superstition, too. If you dream while sleeping on a pillow stuffed with plucked down during a full moon, you'll receive a prophecy. What kind of prophecy? Vague ones, probably involving fields and rain and that weird merchant with the crooked smile. But people believed. Some still do. You switch to the next bird, Hubert. This is where things get complicated. You try to approach gently, offer a bit of apple. He snatches it, drops it, stomps on it, and looks at you like, try me. You do. You get one feather before the flapping begins. It's less bird handling and more medieval wrestling. You're halfway into a bush when he finally lets go and struts off like he's won a joust. He probably thinks he has. Eventually, you gather enough for 2 small pillows and part of a sleeve. It'll take at least a dozen sessions like this to make a full cloak. You'd rather fight a dragon, a small one, with no wings. As you carry the feather pouch back to the weaving room, you pass the cook. She's muttering about the gooseberry jam shortage and eyes your birds with suspicion. You quickly assure her they're not the edible ones. She's unconvinced. Inside the manor, the sewing mistress greets you with enthusiasm. She's already working on next season's fashion, a feather-trimmed shawl, and a pair of goose-down slippers. She pats your hand and says, "Bless you, child. Without your patience, we'd all be sleeping on straw like criminals." You don't know whether to feel proud or insulted. One goose-related historical oddity: some nobles believed sleeping on goose down improved fertility. There was even a recipe involving feathers, honey, and sage to attract luck and love. You briefly wonder if that's why Lady Matilda keeps requesting extra plush every spring. Academics sometimes debate whether goose down truly offered superior warmth, or if it was just another case of nobility romanticizing discomfort. After all, the cloaks were rarely worn outdoors. They were for admiration only. Much like your job. You return to the enclosure as the sun starts dipping. The geese are calmer now, likely plotting under the impression that you've stolen pieces of their souls. They'll recover. You might too. You sit on a rock again, your knees aching, your pouch of feathers clutched like a bag of gold. You look at the clouds and sigh. One of the goslings climbs onto your boot and falls asleep. Your heart melts just a little. Then it poops. Back to reality. Tonight, Lady Matilda will rest her perfectly coiled hair upon the fluff of your labor. She will dream of tournaments and berry tarts. You will dream of geese feathers and Hubert. Always Hubert. And maybe, just maybe, you'll wake up with your dignity intact. Probably not, but maybe. Snoozy trivia to close the day. Some feather pillows in noble homes were so well made they were passed down generations, like heirlooms. Imagine being gifted grandma's pillow at your wedding. Still better than a third-hand chamber pot. And remember, If a goose ever nods at you twice in a row, it probably means nothing. But you'll think about it for hours. The March of the Goose Brigade. Morning again. Because of course it is. Today you don't get the luxury of peaceful field nibbling or feather plucking. No, today is parade day, or as you've come to call it, the March of the Goose Brigade. A twice-a-season ritual where Lady Matilda's prized geese are displayed through the village in a show of wealth order and sheer stubborn optimism. It's a medieval photo op, but with more feathers and significantly fewer people knowing where to look. You're already sweating, and you haven't even wrangled the boots on yet. The geese have been brushed, yes brushed, and their feathers lightly scented with a mixture of mint and lavender water. Some wear tiny silk ribbons tied just behind their wings. Hubert ripped his off immediately and swallowed it whole. You're pretending not to notice. If you report it, you'll spend the evening in the apothecary's shed looking for goose-safe laxatives. The goose cart, a small wooden wagon meant to carry the sick or moody birds, has been polished. It now gleams like it wants a raise. It squeaks dramatically with every bump, an attention-seeking wheel among equally attention-seeking birds. You line them up in formation, a feat requiring strategic breadcrumbs, whispered threats, and mild existential bargaining. Lady Matilda watches from her balcony, nodding like a proud general reviewing troops. You suspect she has never walked more than 5 feet with these creatures. But now she waves her hand. Let the parade begin. You lead the march through the castle gate out into the cobbled village. First is Beatrix regal and gliding like a swan in a scandalous disguise. Then the twins Jasper and Fluffin follow close behind, occasionally attempting synchronized wing flaps. After them, the slightly chaotic cluster of lesser geese. And at the rear, of course, Hubert. He walks with a swagger that says, I allow this parade to happen. The villagers pause their work, eyebrows raised. Some smile. Children point and laugh. One baker claps, but you're not sure if it's for you or for Fluffin's dramatic tail wiggle. You pass the blacksmith's forge where sparks fly and the anvil sings. The geese do not appreciate it. There's a mild panic honking, flapping a rogue lunge toward a horse's tail. You regain control using a sharp whistle and a slightly panicked interpretive dance. The parade continues, winding past the chapel and into the town square. Here, things get ceremonial. A table has been set with fresh lettuce, a silver dish of grain, and because this is nobility, a small harpist playing goose-themed madrigals. Poor lad. He looks terrified. Lady Matilda descends from her carriage steps gracefully into the square and begins what she calls the blessing of the beak. She places her hand gently on Beatrix's head, mutters a few lines in poorly pronounced Latin, and sprinkles her with rosewater. Beatrix sneezes. This is all normal. You try to keep the rest of the flock still. Hubert nips at the harpist. Jasper wanders into the grain dish. One gosling falls asleep mid-step. Somehow, this all ends in applause. Now comes the return march, also known as herding chaos uphill in full public view. The geese are tired. Some are grumpy. Others are too full. And Hubert is now convinced he deserves to ride in the cart, refusing to walk, and honking like an overpaid diva. You cave. He climbs in, fluffs up, and stares at the crowd like royalty. You trudge back to the manor. By the time you arrive, your tunic is grass-stained. Your hands are scratched, and your patience is hanging by a thread. But you did it. No geese lost no major injuries, and only one mildly offended harpist. A success. You release the flock back into the yard. Lady Matilda tosses you a honey cake as a reward. You try to catch it. You do not succeed. It lands in a puddle. Hubert eats it. Of course he does. And here's your sleepy history tidbit. In some regions of medieval Europe, goose parades were held not just for nobility, but as part of religious festivals. Geese were associated with Saint Martin, who was famously betrayed by honking geese when he tried to hide from being made a bishop. The lesson: don't trust a goose with your secrets. Also, weird side note, there are illustrations in a 14th century manuscript showing geese in tiny cloaks and hats during processions. Scholars debate whether these were literal costumes or artistic exaggeration. Personally, you suspect the artist had seen Hubert and just gave up trying to make sense of anything. And one last soft chuckle. For the road, someone once trained a goose to bow on command during a noble feast. It was a sensation until it learned to bow for bread. And only bread. One day it refused to stop bowing. 10 minutes straight, just bowing. Honk, bow, honk. Until the Lord cried actual tears. Sleep well tonight, knowing that even in the medieval world, someone had to wrangle the parade, and it was almost never the person getting the applause. Noble property with attitude. You wake up to silence, which is immediately suspicious. Silence means something is wrong, possibly escaped, possibly plotting. You dash outside, tunic half-tied hair still somewhere between haystack and helmet. There they are, your flock lined up in perfect disobedience, staring at you like you're late to your own public humiliation. One of them, probably Hubert, has already pooped inside the polished goose cart from yesterday. A statement clearly. Today's task is simple on paper health checks. Because these geese are not just poultry, they're noble property, complete with expectations, reputations, and fragile egos. Think prize stallions, but with beaks, webbed feet, and less patience. You begin with Fluffin, who allows you to lift each wing like a fluffy curtain. You check the feathers, the eyes, the claws. She seems fine. Sighs like a queen. Waddles off. Next is Jasper. He resists. You bribe him with grapes. He fakes an injury for 2 minutes just to see if it gets him better snacks. It works. Then comes Beatrix. Regal. Dramatic. She has developed a slight limp. You apply a warm herbal compress, and she closes her eyes like she's at a spa. A passing maid whispers that Lady Matilda once asked if Beatrix could be carried to meals to avoid further strain. You pray she was joking. These geese are insured. Insured. As in, if one gets sick, there's documentation, witnesses, possibly a monk called in for moral support. Lady Matilda keeps tiny parchment scrolls with each goose's name, age, temperament, and feather color. The records are more detailed than most villagers' birth certificates. And the hierarchy. Oh, it's brutal. Beatrix is the clear alpha. She eats first. Drinks from the ceramic bowl, not the tin one. Her straw bedding is fluffed twice daily. Jasper and Fluffin follow her like nobles in a courtly dance. The younger geese are terrified of her. You're only slightly less so. Hubert, though. Hubert is a wild card. He's not part of the hierarchy. He is the chaos. He wanders where he pleases, steals food from others, and once deliberately sat in Lady Matilda's embroidery basket. She laughed. You had to clean the thread. You sit down on a stool beside the coop and flip through the maintenance list brush. The feathers inspect for mites. Reapply ribbon collars, polish the copper name tags. Yes, copper, with names etched in calligraphy. One is misspelled. You haven't had the courage to fix it. There's a historical reason for this absurdity. In many medieval courts, prized animals were seen as extensions of the lord or lady's identity. A well-kept goose reflected control sophistication and a sense of noble detachment from messy everyday survival. These geese weren't for eating except maybe once a year, and even then with ceremony. They were for display, for status, for poetry. A French noble once described his prized goose as a creature of vigilance and poise, more alert than a sentry. The same goose later bit his cousin and had to be exiled to a side courtyard, still noble, just slightly more distant. Some lords even made goose handlers swear oaths. You have not sworn anything, but the way you fear Beatrix's glare feels like a contract. The strangest part these geese know, They walk differently when guests visit. They pose strut preen. They puff their chests, just enough to say, yes, we're better than your cousin's peacocks. It's unsettling, and somehow a little admirable. As you finish the inspections, you catch Hubert trying to climb onto the barrel of barley mash. Again, he's too round for this. You yell his name. He stares you down and jumps anyway. Barrel tips. Mash flies. Geese scatter. Chaos resumes. You're now covered in mash feathers and shame. Lady Matilda calls from the window. Is everything all right down there? You reply through gritted teeth. Perfectly noble, my lady. She nods and returns to her embroidery. You suspect she knows exactly what just happened. Probably enjoys it. Later, as you scrub mash off your boots, you remember that one noble household once commissioned miniature goose portraits to hang in the guest room. Painted, framed, named. The guests reportedly loved them. You try to imagine sleeping under the painted stare of a goose named Lionel III. You shudder. There's even scholarly debate about whether some nobles bequeathed geese in their wills. A 13th century document lists one Gandergray of feather who hath dwelled with me these 7 winters as part of a minor estate's legacy. The academic argument, was this affection or satire? Either way, you suspect Hubert will outlive you and haunt you, possibly in goose form, possibly not. You herd the flock back into formation. Now rebrushed, renamed, you fix the calligraphy tag in secret and vaguely presentable again. Hubert still refuses the ribbon. You let him win this round. Night falls and the yard grows quiet. The noble geese curl into their straw beds, attended to by silence and moonlight. You lean back against the fence post, half asleep, and whisper, I work for birds. With property rights. Sleepy side notes before we fade. In some towns, noble geese were granted symbolic freedom in the will of a lord, meaning they could not be sold, moved, or plucked without ritual permission. One even had a retirement coop with an embroidered pillow. Also, someone once tried to teach their goose to dance by playing lute music every evening. It sort of worked. Until the goose demanded grapes for every performance. And if you ever doubt the absurdity of class structures, remember, you live in a world where a goose can have a title and you're still not allowed in the upstairs library. Guardians with Beaks. You're roused from sleep not by dawn, not by a bell, not even by the usual grumpy honks, but by a scream. Human. From the orchard. You lurch upright, grab your stick, and sprint through the damp grass with a speed that surprises even you. What do you find? A traveling peddler backed up against a tree, arms flailing wildly as 3 geese close in on him, like feathered bailiffs, collecting unpaid taxes. You call them off, sort of. Really, you just shout their names in a tone that suggests disappointment and possible consequences. They pause. The man escapes. The geese honk triumphantly. You sigh. They've done it again. The geese have defended the manor. Because, dear listener, what the world often forgets, and what medieval nobles never did, is that geese are excellent guards. No, really. Before doorbells, dogs, or strategically placed moats, there were geese. And not the gentle kind. A good flock of geese could protect an entire estate courtyard better than 2 sleepy watchmen. Sharp hearing, territorial instinct, piercing honks that could rattle roof tiles. And best of all, no bribing the geese. They are incorruptible. Also, very dramatic. You check the perimeter. The orchard gate was left open. Again. You make a mental note to lecture the stable boys. Again. Beatrix is still patrolling, chest puffed out like she's preparing for a duel. Hubert is nibbling on a half-eaten apple like he just defended the crown. And here's the kicker. This reputation isn't modern exaggeration. There are actual historical accounts praising geese as early warning systems. Most famously, the Capitoline geese of Rome, who, according to legend, saved the city by honking at midnight when Gauls tried to sneak in. Medieval chroniclers loved this story and cited it often as proof that geese had divine protection, or at least incredible paranoia. Lady Matilda, of course, heard the story and declared her own flock the Sentinels of Brackenmere. She even commissioned tiny leather medallions for them to wear on festival days. You haven't had the heart to tell her they mostly just bite anything that moves after dark. But still, you can't deny their effectiveness. The geese have alerted you to poachers, wandering pigs, suspicious monks. Once a lost child who had wandered into the barley field. The honking led searchers right to him. The child cried. The geese honked. It was emotional for everyone. You think back to last winter when a fox got too close to the outer pen. Before you could grab a torch, the geese had already formed a semicircle and advanced, wings out, heads low, honks building like a war drum. The fox fled tail between legs into the snowstorm. One goose chased him past the tree line. That was Hubert naturally. You take a break. On the edge of the garden wall, geese spread around you, like oddly shaped security guards on a union break. A few peck at the dirt. One honks at a butterfly. You sip lukewarm broth and wonder for the 100th time why anyone bothers with dogs. In some manors, geese had their own posts, literally. Wooden perches or shaded archways where they'd sit and observe the gate. They weren't chained. They didn't need to be. Anyone who got too close learned quickly geese do not warn. They attack. The warning is the attack. You've even heard rumors, though, never confirmed, that a minor barony in the Western Marches awarded a goose the honorary title of Knight Marshal. It wore a small helmet during ceremonies. You hope this is true. The world needs that to be true. Academically, there's debate over whether the guard goose was a practical defense or a theatrical one. Some say the nobles exaggerated. Others point to estate records listing goose feed guard flock as proof of official duties. One record even noted a higher grain ration for aggressive geese preferred. You begin afternoon rounds. The wind is soft, and the yard smells like straw and old apples. Most geese follow lazily, but the guards, Beatrix Jasper, and yes, even Hubert, remain alert. Every rustle gets a look. Every stranger gets sized up. You almost feel safe. Until Hubert attacks the laundry. You rush over to find him dragging a linen sheet through the mud like a captured flag. The laundry-maid sobs. You apologize. He honks. Beatrix joins in. The maid flees. You try to fold the sheet back onto the line. It now resembles something dug up from a battlefield. You hang it anyway. By sunset, the geese are gathered in formation near the orchard. Heads turn toward the road. Travelers pass. No incidents. You count that as a win. You sprinkle extra grain for the guards, then retreat to the bench for a well-earned rest. You glance down at the little copper tag hanging from Beatrix's neck. It reads, Defender of the Gate. She doesn't know what it says, but she wears it like a medal. A sleepy bit of trivia in 15th century household guides, goose training manuals existed often, just a series of notes passed between stewards. They included commands like circle wing out and back off monk. Probably not standardized, but you like to imagine them in tiny scrolls tied with string. Also, if a goose ever stands perfectly still and stares into the dark without blinking, that's your cue to panic, or at least double bolt the coop. And one final soft laugh before bed. A noble once tried to breed a goose with the temperament of a cat. He got pecked hissed at, and the bird sat in his lap for exactly 3 seconds before attacking the upholstery. History is silent on whether he tried again. Feathered diplomacy. It starts with a scroll. Always the scroll. Lady Matilda summons you to the East Hall, where she is seated beside a porcelain dish of cherries and a map of the region spread dramatically across a carved oak table. She waves the scroll like it's either a priceless royal decree or a particularly irritating invitation. You recognize the seal Baron Elric of Crowsmere. Your stomach sinks, not because of politics, because you know what's coming. It's a goose trade request. You are about to enter the most frustrating, tedious, and highly specific branch of medieval diplomacy, noble waterfowl negotiations. Baron Elric, it seems, has taken a shining to one of Lady Matilda's younger geese, a speckled gander named Lancelot. He wants to arrange a seasonal exchange, offering one of his own prized guard hens in return. Your job: coordinate the trade, supervise the transfer, and ensure no one's feathers or egos get ruffled. You consider pretending to faint. But it's too late. You're dispatched at once with a satchel of oatcakes, a formal letter penned in unnecessarily flowery Latin, and Lancelot himself now awkwardly tied into a travel harness. On the road to Crowsmere, Lancelot honks the entire time. Not in protest. He just likes to hear his voice. You arrive dusty, slightly deaf, and deeply unsure why anyone thought goose trading was a civilized tradition. Baron Elric greets you personally. He is tall, gray-faced, and introduces you to his flock like a general introducing cavalry. His champion, a goose named Clementine. She bows. You think it's deliberate. You try to bow back. She pecks your shin. Formal introductions complete. You oversee the inspection period. This involves weighing each goose, observing their gait, checking their underfeathers, and making polite but incredibly pointed comments like, she's quite alert for her age, and he seems sturdy. It's exhausting. Baron Elric insists on a ceremonial walk, both geese side by side through his orchard. It's meant to symbolize trust between households. Instead, Lancelot immediately bites an apple and falls over, and Clementine honks until 3 horses bolt from the stables. You end the day with signatures, wax seals, and the exchange of feathers literally. Each noble must keep a feather from the traded goose in a velvet pouch, proof of goodwill and future breeding claims. You tuck yours safely into your satchel and wonder, not for the first time, if this is what medieval statecraft looked like in general. Probably yes. On your way home, Clementine rides in the cart like she owns the manor already. She refuses grain rejects hay and only relaxes when you hum a particular tune. You later realize it's the same lullaby the Crowsmere steward sang under his breath. Geese are nothing if not consistent. Back at Brackenmere, Lady Matilda inspects Clementine with the same scrutiny normally reserved for bridal jewelry. She nods once and says simply, "She will do." You resist the urge to collapse on the cobblestones. This isn't the first time you've done goose diplomacy. It won't be the last. A few years ago, a failed goose match nearly sparked a minor feud between 2 baronies. One party accused the other of falsifying age records. Accusations flew. A steward was exiled. The goose in question was secretly returned in the dead of night. You know because you carried it. What's stranger? This wasn't rare. Historically, noble households used geese for symbolic alliances, especially among lesser nobility. Birds were exchanged as tokens of peace, promises of shared grain rights, or wedding gifts. A goose could seal a deal just as surely as a handshake or a dagger if things went wrong. Some historians call this avian arbitration. Others roll their eyes and suggest nobles just really liked pretending they were still in Roman times. The truth? Somewhere in between. Birds were valuable, emotional, personalized, and more importantly, neutral. You can't insult someone's goose and call it just business. You escort Clementine to her new coop, freshly decorated with lavender sprigs and a copper plaque that reads, "Ambassador of Crowsmere." She blinks slowly, accepts a grape, honks once. You think that's approval? Meanwhile, Lancelot's departure has stirred unrest. Jasper circles the yard, looking lost. Fluffin is unusually quiet. Hubert suspiciously is behaving very well, which makes you more nervous than usual. You'll need to monitor this closely. By twilight, you sit on your favorite bench near the well. A breeze rustles the hedges. Clementine patrols the perimeter like she's been here for years. The Brackenmere geese still watch her from a distance, muttering like villagers at a new tavern owner. You wonder how long until they fight. or worse, bond. Sleepy fun fact. A noble woman in 1421 requested all her geese be trained to recognize her family crest on banners so they'd know which side to honk for in war. This likely didn't work, but one goose did reportedly honk in rhythm during a parade. That was considered a victory. Also, a failed goose trade once resulted in a duel between squires. Over feather condition, swords were drawn, both missed. Geese watched. And lastly, should you ever be asked to mediate goose diplomacy, bring grapes a good walking stick and absolutely no pride. Geese can smell it, and they will not negotiate. Training a goose. Losing your sanity. You're standing in the middle of a courtyard holding a whistle in one hand, a satchel of grapes in the other, and shouting the word "turn" at a goose who is very clearly ignoring you on purpose. This is training day, or more accurately, the first of 12 miserable afternoons in which you try to prepare 3 noble geese, Beatrix Clementine, Dutch Rake, and an enthusiastic but clueless youngster named Fern, for the midwinter festival procession. It's an annual event where geese march in choreographed patterns behind a flute player, while villagers cheer and nobles clap politely from heated platforms. You hate it already. The goose training manual you've been given is written in cramped script and smells like someone spilled turnip wine on it a generation ago. It contains such useful instructions as encourage forward motion with a proud bearing, and be firm but fair when asking for a curtsy. You reread that sentence 3 times? Yes, it really says curtsy. You blow the whistle once sharply. Beatrix responds by closing her eyes and lying down. Clementine struts away toward a beet cart. Fern spins in a slow circle and honks at a tree. You sigh deeply and consider faking an injury. You didn't sign up for this part of goose herding. You're a wrangler, a caretaker, a feeder. But Lady Matilda insists her birds must be festival ready, and the steward reminded you in his most formal voice that last year's trainer was reassigned to latrine duty for goats after Beatrix refused to flap on cue. You raise the whistle again and try again. In the weeks to come, you develop a reluctant routine early morning conditioning, a fancy way of saying walking in circles mid-morning, musical exposure, forcing them to tolerate flutes, and afternoon drill formations, where you march in front of them like a deranged conductor while shouting commands like "circle pause" and "no, not that tree again." Some small successes occur. Fern learns to follow your finger. Clementine stops biting the musician. Beatrix, she tolerates your presence. You'll take what you can get. Still, the training is absurd. You find yourself crafting tiny obstacle courses made of hay bales and streamers. You create goose-sized sashes. You design a reward system involving grapes barley and the occasional boiled egg, not from their own coop. You're not that twisted. One afternoon, a visiting baroness sees your efforts and declares it utterly charming. You mutter something polite while trying to extract a goose from under a wheelbarrow. Historically, goose training had its place. In some parts of Europe, especially among court entertainers and animal handlers, birds were trained to perform in pageants, mock battles, and even theater. Yes, there were goose actors. One play required a goose to honk at the line, who speaks thus. It did. Once. Then it honked randomly for the rest of the performance and knocked over a prop bishop. Some medieval manuscripts suggest geese could be conditioned through repetition and food association, like small angry monks with wings. Others warn that trying to force a goose to do anything will result in bite and shame. You're currently experiencing both. Clementine begins showing promise. She moves left when you lift your left arm. She pauses on the word still. You start to believe. Then one day, she charges full speed at the town herald and ruins 2 yards of brocade. You spend an hour writing apologies and another hour removing feathers from his boots. At night, you dream in honks. Your whistle bleeds into your sleep. You wake up mumbling heel and throwing grapes at the wall, and then comes the final rehearsal. The square is lined with banners. The flute player tunes nervously. Nobles sit sipping cider. You line up the trio, Beatrix, Clementine, Fern, and whisper prayers you're not sure belong to any proper religion. You blow the whistle. Beatrix steps forward. Clementine follows. Fern hesitates. The crowd holds its breath. Then in a moment of baffling grace, they march. Not perfectly, not in sync, but together, like a strange waddling army of confidence. There's a honk or two off tempo. Beatrix veers slightly toward a bakery stall, but they complete the loop. The crowd erupts in applause. Nobles wave. Lady Matilda claps twice and nods at you in acknowledgement, on par with a knighthood. You smile weakly and try not to cry. That night, you feed the geese their favorite treats and sit quietly beside them. You've survived. Barely. Sleepy thought of the night a noble in Flanders once claimed his goose could tell fortune based on how it walked across a field. When it slipped in a puddle, he canceled his engagement. Later it turned out she'd eloped with a lute player. The goose was promoted. In a soft chuckle, for your dreams, a chronicler once described a goose performance as stirring defiant and deeply confusing. That's exactly how you feel after this week. And remember, if a goose ever stares at you, after learning a new trick, don't smile too soon. That's when they plan their revenge. Geese on parade. You thought the worst was over. After training, you were wrong. Because today is the actual parade and nothing. Not all your rehearsals. Not the diplomatic scrolls. Not even the time Hubert escaped and ended up in the Abbey's fish pond could have prepared you for the pressure of leading 3 mildly trained geese through the muddiest cobblestone street this side of the river. It starts with horns, loud, brassy horns, the kind nobles love because they sound expensive and drown out peasants' opinions. You're dressed in your formal tunic, which is just your regular tunic that someone stitched a goose onto. Fern wears a blue ribbon. Clementine has a fresh copper tag. Beatrix has a full head tilt of disdain and seems to be plotting something. The parade line stretches out ahead. Jesters, dancers, a choir of children singing off-key, and then you. Or more accurately, your trio of trained semi-cooperative waterfowl. At first things go okay. Beatrix struts. Clementine flanks her like a fluffy bodyguard. Fern, trying his absolute best, stumbles, slightly but corrects with a proud honk. The crowd chuckles. Some cheer. You exhale slowly. Then a child tosses a crust of bread. And all goose protocol unravels. Clementine lunges. Beatrix turns sharply. Fern, interpreting this as the beginning of rehearsed choreography, spins in place and knocks over a fruit stand. Apples bounce. Nobles gasp. A lute player dives to save his instrument. You blow your whistle with the energy of someone hoping to rewrite fate. Somehow, you regain control. You offer grapes. Whisper gentle threats. The geese reassemble. March resumes. Lady Matilde, riding in her velvet-draped carriage behind you, looks mildly pleased, which in noble speak is the emotional equivalent of a standing ovation. You pass through the market square. Here's where tradition takes over. Geese in parades weren't just for show. In many medieval towns, especially during seasonal festivals, flocks were dressed, paraded, and even presented to the town steward as symbols of prosperity. They represented protection thanks to their guard reputation, abundance because of eggs down, and meat, and oddly loyalty. There's a record from 1364 describing a goose who led 3 processions in a row and was given a name, a medal, and a pension of barley. Another town claimed a goose blessed the harvest by honking exactly as the priest raised the chalice. That goose was later elected honorary mayor. There is debate over whether that was symbolic or just a very slow news month. Back in your parade, the geese are now approaching the blessing steps, a raised platform in front of the abbey, where the bishop blesses each parade group with a quick Latin prayer and a handful of flower petals. It's ceremonial, gentle, completely safe, unless your goose hates Latin. Beatrix ascends the steps like a royal. The bishop raises his hand. She honks, not once, not twice, 3 times. Each honk more aggressive than the last. She stomps, she flaps. Flower petals fly. The bishop blinks. The choir gasps. You reach forward with your emergency grape, a single golden dried raisin tied with twine, and offer it like a sacred relic. Beatrix pauses, snatches the grape, nods. Crisis averted. You apologize. The bishop blesses you personally, possibly out of pity. The rest of the parade goes smoothly, save for a minor detour where Fern tries to chase a pigeon through a cobbler's tent. By the time you circle back toward the castle gates, your boots are soggy. Your dignity is questionable, but the geese look regal. Lady Matilda steps down from her carriage, lifts her veil slightly and says, "The people adored them. Perhaps next year?" 5 geese, you smile, cry internally. Later that night, you sit by the coop. Clementine snores. Fern cuddles next to a leftover apple. Beatrix sits in silence, staring at the moon, like she's remembering past lives. You wrap a blanket around your shoulders and let the quiet settle. Sleepy trivia for tonight. In one German town, there was a brief trend of goose pageants where people judged geese on their plumage walk and social grace. Prizes included sacks of grain and decorative bells. One goose reportedly winked at a judge. It won. Also in 1429, a noble feast featured a parade of geese wearing tiny velvet hoods. The guests applauded. The geese revolted shortly after dessert. And last thought, before you drift off, if a goose ever bows at you during a parade, bow back. It's safer that way. Eggs with social status. The sun isn't even up yet, and you're already crawling through straw, muttering apologies to a goose who's blocking access to her nest like a tiny feathered gatekeeper to buried treasure. Why? Because it's egg collection day, a monthly ritual in which you, the designated goose wrangler / unpaid egg accountant, gather the most precious cargo in Lady Matilda's estate, goose eggs. You stretch your hand slowly beneath Fern, who's trying very hard to look casual while simultaneously vibrating with maternal suspicion. You whisper something reassuring about herbal compresses and fresh hay. She lets you take the egg, then pecks your sleeve on the way out. That's fair. You carry the egg like it's made of spun gold, because to the nobles, it may as well be. See, goose eggs weren't just food. They were statements, culinary symbols of wealth status and refined taste. Larger than hen's eggs, richer in yolk, rarer in frequency, and importantly, laid by birds that hiss and chase you across the yard if you even look at them wrong. In other words, eggs for the elite. You set the first egg into the padded basket and check your list. There are exactly 11 geese capable of laying this month. Lady Matilda expects at least 8 eggs, preferably more. 1 for her table, 2 for gifts, the rest for trade, for culinary experimentation. Her cook is currently obsessed with poaching methods that involve wine and poetry. Clementine's nest is immaculate. 1 egg, still warm. She watches you take it with the detached expression of a noblewoman observing her taxes. Beatrix, however, refuses to participate. Her nest is full of straw feathers and nothing. You suspect she's hiding her eggs. Again. Last time she tucked one under the old herb barrel. Took you 3 days and a sprained ankle to find it. You glance around. She's not blinking. This will be a battle of wits. and the stakes higher than you'd think. In some regions, noble households kept egg books, small ledgers that recorded egg yields per goose, noting everything from shell color to yolk density. Lady Matilda's book is monogrammed. Her steward checks it weekly. A low count leads to questions. Capital Q. Worse goose eggs were often used as gifts between noble families. Forget bouquets, imagine receiving a hand-painted egg on a velvet cushion scented with rosewater and sealed with a wax crest. You're supposed to gasp and say how exquisite. Not is this breakfast. One egg from Beatrix was once sent to a duchess in the north. She responded with a poem and 2 bottles of cherry cordial. Lady Matilda declared the exchange a complete triumph and held a mini feast in the goose's honor. You were told to compose a song. You tried. The geese hated it. Back in the coop, you finally spot the glint of off-white beneath the haystack in the far corner. You approach carefully. Beatrix remains still too still. You grab the egg. She honks loudly. The entire flock stirs. You bolt egg in hand like a thief fleeing a very fluffy crime scene. You make it out alive. Basket now nearly full, you carry it reverently to the kitchen, where cook Gertrude stands with arms crossed, flour on her sleeves and judgment in her eyes. She inspects each egg like a royal gem appraiser. One gets a nod, another a hum. The third she taps and mutters, slightly thin-shelled but usable. You ask her what today's menu includes. She says roasted root pie with goose egg glaze, fried barley cakes with whipped yolk, and a pudding that may or may not involve lavender and regret. You leave her to it. The strangest thing about all this goose eggs were believed to have medicinal properties. Mixed with honey, they were used for coughs. With herbs, they were turned into fertility tonics. One noble claimed eating goose eggs daily cured his melancholy. His diary, however, remains deeply grumpy. Some scholars even suggest that certain families bred geese not just for feathers or meat, but primarily for egg prestige, a kind of poultry-based social climbing. Others argue this is an exaggeration of courtly food culture. But one record from 1443 mentions a goose egg served in a goblet during a betrothal feast. A goblet. You spend the rest of the afternoon carefully marking each egg's origin with a tiny symbol in chalk. Lady Matilda insists on knowing whose egg she's consuming. Beatrix's eggs are marked with a spiral, Clementine's with a tiny triangle, Fern's with a star, mostly because she earned it after finally sitting still. By evening, you're back in the coop, spreading fresh straw and humming softly. The geese are sleepy bellies, full feathers puffed. Beatrix eyes you, but seems to forgive you. Slightly. You look down at the last eggs in the basket, a perfect oval, pearly, faintly warm, and you think, not for the first time, this egg probably has more social influence than you. Sleepy trivia to close your eyes with. In one Italian court, a goose egg was painted with gold leaf, set with a ruby, and gifted to a bishop. He didn't eat it. He displayed it on a pedestal. The goose that laid it given a private pond. And before you drift off, a noble cook once tried to hatch a goose egg in an oven at low heat, watched hourly. It did not go well. But the report says he felt spiritually closer to the process. And finally, if a goose ever lays an egg and stares at you afterward like she expects applause, clap. She worked hard. The Goose Tax. There's a parchment nailed to the post outside the granary this morning. You spot it while carrying a bucket of barley, already half awake and fully irritated. It's official, stamped, sealed. It reads, Inventory Due Quarter Goose Assessment. Submit by week's end. You sigh so hard it startles Fern, who honks defensively and knocks over your bucket. Because it's that time? Again, the Goose Tax. Yes. In this part of the duchy, the local lords are expected to contribute to the regional stores, not in coin or grain, but an actual living, mildly unwilling geese. Why? Because someone long ago decided that birds were more dependable than money. And here you are 3 centuries later, paying the price in feathers and frustration. The steward hands you the list. It's very specific. 2 geese not molting, good feather condition. No limp, no known vendettas. You wonder if Hubert will qualify? He won't. You begin the inspection. Clementine. Too regal. Lady Matilda will never part with her. Beatrix. She's above taxes. Possibly above law. Fern. Too small. Too emotional. You settle on 2 mid-tier geese, Gilbert and Maud. Sturdy, quiet, obedient-ish. They're not favorites, but they're respectable. You ready their travel harnesses, prepare the cart, and bribe them with grapes. You also bring a letter explaining that Hubert is not to be considered under any circumstances, even if he follows you. And off you go down the road to the tax station. Yes, it's a real place nestled beside the mill and reeking of hay paperwork and vague resentment. The goose tax collector, Master Hobbins, greets you like an old enemy. He inspects your birds with a level of scrutiny typically reserved for royal jewels. He weighs them, measures them, lifts wings, checks for mites, whispers at one of them like he's trying to catch it in a lie. Eventually he nods. Acceptable. He hands you a receipt, 2 geese class 2 accepted for quota. Thank you for your contribution to civic stability. You resist the urge to ask if civic stability ever honked at the mayor during chapel. Here's the historical oddity: goose taxes were real in parts of medieval Europe, especially in rural territories where barter systems held strong. Landholders, instead of paying in coin, were assessed for livestock, sheep, pigs, and yes, geese. In some areas, the number of geese owed depended on your acreage, social class, or how many times your flock had trampled someone else's garden. One 13th century record from Normandy lists 4 geese fit and fat for the winter dues. Another from Saxony specifies 1 goose per 30 rods of field adjusted seasonally. That's right. Someone had to calculate goose per acre ratios like it was normal math. You walk back to the manor lighter physically and emotionally. Gilbert and Maud are now government property. You hope they'll have a decent coop and at least semi-polite neighbors. But it doesn't end there, because now Lady Matilda wants an extra pair on hand in case of sudden noble requests. Unexpected banquets, she says, and gifts for visiting envoys. So back to sorting, back to feeding, back to fluff checking. You become a goose logistics expert who's ready to be donated, who's not laying, who recently bit the baker and can't be trusted in diplomatic settings. You draw a grid in chalk on the barn wall marking names, ages, temperaments. The steward calls it obsessive. You call it survival. Meanwhile, Hubert watches all this like a general eyeing maps of future conquest. At dinner, you overhear 2 footmen talking about a distant manor where geese are taxed in reverse, each noble given extra birds as part of their land title. One lord reportedly received 7 geese a year as part of his inheritance. He didn't want them, tried to release them. They returned. Loyalty or haunting unknown. Another tale tells of a village that refused the goose tax entirely, offering pickled beets instead. The baron accepted. The tax record now lists 12 jars, red and tart, in place of birds. A bold move. Some scholars argue that goose taxes reflect the practical side of feudalism, less about coins, more about utility. Others say it was just another way to confuse peasants and keep scribes employed. You say geese don't care? They still honk at everyone equally. By nightfall, you check the coop. Fern is asleep. Beatrix has stolen someone else's straw. Clementine eyes the moon with a look of philosophical distance. And Hubert, he's standing on the cart. He honks once, long, solemn. You don't speak fluent goose. But if you did, you think he just declared himself tax exempt. Sleepy trivia for the road. In one Hungarian region, goose taxes were paid on St. Martin's Day, with processions of honking birds paraded through town before being delivered to the bishop's kitchen. Festive, chaotic, honk heavy. Also, a noble tax agent once refused a goose because its feathers were uncooperative. The goose bit him. The town sided with the bird. Justice, apparently. And one final thought before your eyes close. If a goose ever tries to hide under a hay bale during tax week, don't assume it's scared. It's probably trying to negotiate. Poultry. Passport. Patrol. Today's assignment arrives, rolled in velvet, sealed with wax, and delivered by a boy who looks both honored and confused. You break the seal and read aloud. By order of Lady Matilda, all geese leaving Brackenmere. Grounds must henceforth be properly marked, recorded, and escorted under supervision, effective immediately. Signed, Her Ladyship Steward of Order Grain and Bird Movements. You read it again? Yes, you are now in charge of goose passports. Let that sink in. You gather your tools, a tiny inkwell, a collection of pre-cut parchment tags, several lengths of silk cord, and because you've learned the hard way, a pouch of grapes for bribes and peacekeeping. Each goose gets a registration tag. It lists name, age, lineage. Yes, lineage, primary feather color. And gets this, their most recent public behavior rating, a scale from dutiful to disruptive. You're told this is for diplomatic transparency. Beatrix, dutiful with a note that says, refuse to curtsy. Allowable. Fern, anxious but willing. Hubert, disruptive. Underlined. Twice. This may sound absurd, but in noble estates, birds, especially the favored ones, were often tracked like valuables. Why? Because geese had a tendency to go missing either through escape mishandling or the occasional ambitious cook with bad timing. Worse theft was rampant. Goose theft, you ask, absolutely. A properly raised goose trained calm under pressure, high feather density, was worth nearly as much as a milk goat in some markets. In one documented case, a noble household accused their rivals of abducting and re-dyeing their champion gander for use in a local harvest parade. The case went unsolved. The goose refused to testify. So now you've been tasked with securing the flock. You start with Clementine, who accepts her silk tag collar like royalty accepting a knighthood. Jasper fidgets Fern, trips over her own tag string, and Hubert predictably refuses. You attempt to tie it around his neck. He sidesteps, honks, and bites the scroll out of your hand. You chase him halfway around the manor before luring him in with an overripe fig. With the flock tagged and documented, you open the bird ledger, a massive tome locked in the steward's cabinet containing every goose's name, ID number, yes, and travel history. You are instructed to update this daily. You write, Gander, Hubert of Brackenmere, date 14th of Whitmarch. Event escape coop, returned by force. Behavior, conditionally, tolerable. And here's where it gets even stranger. Some noble houses issued physical travel documents for prized birds. In Flanders, a goose writ authorized specific fowl to cross boundaries unbothered by tollmen or guards. These were real parchments, sometimes bearing wax impressions of the goose's foot. One lord allegedly insisted on signing all bird passports personally. His name appears on over 200 of them. The birds, naturally, never signed back. There's even a known case where a goose's travel writ was honored by a border fort because the guard recognized her from festival performances. Diplomacy at its finest. You begin supervising all goose movement beyond the gates. Any bird leaving for the tax office, a ceremonial walk, or a gift delivery must be documented. You make copies. You file tags. You double-check plumage descriptions. And people think medieval life was simple. At one point, the steward suggests developing a color-coded system, blue tags for trade red, for performance gold for those attached to nobility. You nod solemnly and resist the urge to cry. Soon your job title feels less like goose herder and more like immigration officer for semi-domesticated aristocratic birds. The real test comes when Lady Matilda sends Clementine to the nearby abbey as a symbolic offering for the feast of St. Sylvan. The monk at the gate scoffs. You expect me to receive a goose. You produce Clementine's scroll, stamped with both Lady Matilda's seal and your personal signature. He blinks, reads it, bows to the goose. You walk home feeling like a diplomat. That evening, you revise Hubert's record after he steals 2 tags and eats a corner of the ledger. His rating is adjusted to actively scheming. You consider a warning label. Sleepy trivia for the parchment-minded. There are manuscripts detailing fowl inventory alongside grain counts and armor stockpiles. One such record contains detailed ink sketches of each goose, complete with wing angles. No explanation is given. Scholars are baffled. Probably an early attempt at mugshots. Also, one noble household attempted to brand their geese with vegetable dye in the shape of a family crest. The birds rebelled. The garden suffered. The project was quietly abandoned. And a final note. Before you sleep, if a goose ever looks at your written report, honks once, and walks away, just know they've read it. And they have notes. Hissing and heraldry. It starts with a painting. Not just any painting, a family crest. Newly commissioned, freshly delivered. Stretched across half the solar wall in Lady Matilda's great hall. You stare at it in awe, squinting at the intricate design. A velvet shield flanked by lilies and sheaves of barley, topped with a silver helm. And right in the center, poised proud and mid-honk, is a goose. Your goose. To be precise, Beatrix. She's been immortalized. You point and whisper, Is that her tongue? Because yes, the painter somehow captured even that, her signature sideways glare, and the raised wing she only does when offended by meal portions. Lady Matilda beams. A symbol of vigilance, she says, and nobility, and perhaps a reminder to our enemies that we bite. You nod, slowly, because now it's official, the House of Brackenmere has adopted the goose into its heraldry. Historically, this isn't as strange as it sounds. Sure, most noble families went for lions, boars, dragons, or stags, powerful animals with teeth or antlers and marketing appeal. But lesser houses, especially rural ones, often used animals of familiarity. Swans, hounds, and yes, geese. Especially when those geese had reputations for saving property, waking guards, or biting visiting barons. In fact, a 14th century Welsh family bore a sigil of 3 geese, passant, meaning walking side by side, heads turned. Why? Because according to family legend, a flock once honked at invading raiders and spoiled a midnight ambush. The geese survived. The raiders didn't. Now your task is clear, the ceremonial goose inspection. Lady Matilda wants all geese in presentable condition in case of heraldic inquiry. Apparently it's not enough to paint a goose. You must ensure that your flock lives up to its painted legacy. You begin with grooming. Feathers brushed, beaks polished with soft cloth, and a hint of chamomile oil, and wingspans measured for symmetry. Beatrix submits with her usual air of tragic nobility. Clementine poses like she's auditioning for a tapestry. Hubert rolls in mud on purpose. You scrub him twice. He retaliates by pecking your inkpot and walking across your census sheet. In a strange twist, the steward interprets this as his official signature. You leave it. The goose has a better autograph than you do. Then comes the banner unveiling. A new cloth standard is hoisted atop the manor gate. Crimson, with a gold goose mid-step. The townsfolk gather, children cheer. A few older villagers raise eyebrows but say nothing. After all, the last crest featured a turnip. The family motto is updated as well. It now reads, Silentia frangit answer. You ask what it means. The steward says, the goose breaks silence. You try not to laugh. You fail. Soon after, you begin receiving guests. Minor nobles arrive to inspect the manor's new icon. Some nod approvingly. Others smirk. One particularly snooty knight mutters something about foul pretensions and is promptly chased across the courtyard by Hubert. Lady Matilde calls it a sign from heaven. The crest begins appearing everywhere. on linen napkins, on wine bottles, embroidered onto servant cuffs. At one point, you catch a maid feeding fern from a bowl that now bears her own face. You quietly back away. But there's strategy behind the feathers. See, heraldry wasn't just decoration, it was power branding, a message. You didn't choose a symbol because it was pretty. You chose it because it said something. Lions said strength. Falcons said nobility. A goose. It says, we're watchful underestimated, and we're not afraid to hiss first. Some scholars speculate that geese were coded warnings in certain heraldic systems. A noble who bore the goose might be signaling subversion readiness, or that they simply liked waking up their enemies at 3 a.m. with screeching. You begin sketching new versions for use on official stationery. The steward insists on left-facing goose with mild snarl. Lady Matilda prefers regal head tilt wings aloft. You suggest Hubert-like stance with widened eyes of menace. The suggestion is declined. In private, you wonder if this is all a bit much. But then you remember this is a world where people duel over duck pond boundaries and once crowned a goat, honorary reeve of a village. Goose heraldry is practically restrained. Still, you worry it's gone to their heads. Beatrix begins standing beneath the banner like she knows. She watches every visitor pass with smug composure. You've even seen her take slightly longer, more theatrical steps. Fern starts bowing every time you speak. Clementine refuses to sleep unless someone hangs the banner facing her coop. Hubert tries to eat the corner of the cloth. You think that sums it up? Sleepy heraldic trivia for tonight. The Book of Beastly Arms, an actual 15th century compilation, includes not just lions and bears, but entries for squirrels, otters, and Answer Domesticus, the domestic goose. One entry describes the goose as noble in alertness, sharp in judgment, loyal in dawn. Someone clearly owned a Beatrix. Also a German knight once wore a goose crest on his helmet during a tourney. He lost his match, but won the crowd. The goose bowed after. And one final flap before sleep. If your house ever adopts a goose as its symbol, just remember, it's not just your banner they'll represent. It's your shoes they'll probably steal next. Gooseberries and Gossip. It's market day in Brackenmere. The sun is warm, the road is muddy, and your cart, laden with freshly plucked goose feathers and a modest basket of eggs, is pulled not by oxen or horse, but by Fern. Or rather, Fern walks beside it in her little harness like a very fluffy, very judgmental show pony. It's mostly symbolic. The cart has wheels. You're the one pushing it. Fern just thinks she's in charge. You reach the village square, just as the bell rings, signaling the start of trade, and more importantly, the start of gossip hour. Because here in the market, you are not just the goose herder. You are the unwitting holder of every scandal secret and mildly scandalous detail that feathers its way through noble ears and peasant lips alike. Why? Because no one watches what they say around the bird person. You're invisible. You are background. You are safe. And you're everywhere. You start by setting up your stand next to the berry seller, old Marta, who's busy haggling over a bruised basket of gooseberries with a merchant who smells faintly of turnip stew and defeat. She sees you winks and slides over a handful of the ripest berries in exchange for a soft down feather. She leans close. They say Sir Baldwin's geese all fled last week. Into the woods. Whole flock. Gone. Just like his steward's daughter. You raise an eyebrow. Marta nods, wide-eyed. Scandal. As the morning wears on, the stories swirl like smoke from the bread oven. Someone claims Lady Matilda's new crest is a secret message to the Baron of Grunwick. Someone else swears that goose eggs cure hiccups if consumed under a waning moon, while barefoot. You don't know what's true anymore, but you do know this. People talk, and when they do, the goose herder hears it all. A child approaches your stand, points at Fern, and asks if she lays golden eggs. You deadpan only on Thursdays. His eyes widen. You feel powerful. As the day unfolds, you trade feathers for honey eggs for candles and a ribbon for a small tin of goat butter. All the while, you're tuned in to the hum of village talk. Here's what you've gathered so far. A merchant swears the bishop's geese now wear bells that chime in harmony. You suspect exaggeration. Someone is secretly training ducks to march in protest against the local mill taxes. You are intrigued. There's a rumor that Lady Matilda is planning to host a goose court, an actual performance, in which the birds judge local disputes for festival entertainment. You already know who's getting pecked first. You quietly jot some of this into your Goose Gossip ledger, a small notebook hidden under your grain sack. Not because you're nosy you are, but because you've learned that what's whispered near the goose cart eventually becomes policy at the manor. And don't underestimate the geese's role in this. They're symbols, yes, but they're also characters in every village story. Beatrix, the banner goose, is said to never blink at a liar. Clementine has become the unofficial mascot of fairness. Fern is too pure for politics. And Hubert is the boogeyman. The cobbler swears he saw Hubert the night his prize shoes went missing. The baker blames Hubert for every failed tart. The blacksmith insists Hubert stares through souls. You don't deny any of it. It's easier that way. Historically, this phenomenon isn't new. Medieval towns often developed entire legends around animals, especially those tied to noble houses. There's a goose in northern France, said to have chosen a mayor by biting everyone but one nervous clerk. Another in Bohemia refused to honk during times of famine, a sign apparently of divine sadness. Geese became folk oracles, symbols of moods, omens, and judgment. You wonder if Beatrix knows. Probably. After a long day of selling, bartering, and quietly archiving scandals, you pack up your cart. Fern trots beside you proud. She's earned 3 berries and a gentle head pat. Back at the manor, you're met with 2 updates. The steward would like your opinion on hosting a goose trial during the harvest fair. Someone's been leaving anonymous letters in the kitchen, shaped like folded goose wings. No one knows what they mean. You nod exhausted and carry the day's findings to the coop. The birds greet you with soft honks and head tilts. Beatrix stands on her perch, eyes narrowed as if to say, "Well, what did they say about me today?" You toss her a gooseberry. She accepts. Sleepy tidbit. Before dreams, one town in Wales had a goose wall, a literal stone wall, where residents would post messages and updates using feathers as pins. It was eventually banned due to escalating feathery disputes. Also, a noble woman in Burgundy was known for whispering secrets to her geese before bedtime. Her enemies suspected them of espionage. Her husband suspected she was just lonely. And last thought before sleep, if a goose ever honks twice and pecks your boot in public, don't be embarrassed. That's how rumors are born, and also how they're squashed. Listen, you're elbow deep in a mixture of mashed thyme, boiled vinegar, and something that might be honey or might be old goose drool. Hard to tell anymore. The important part is that Beatrix has a limp, and Lady Matilda is in a state. She's our banner bearer, the lady cried this morning, clutching a feather like a holy relic. We cannot have a parade with a limping emblem, so now you're the healer. Not the trained monk with herbal parchments, not the village midwife. You, the goose herder. Because according to some obscure house rule written in decorative Latin, the keeper of the birds shall also be their tender of ailment. Which sounds noble, until you're rubbing salve into a suspiciously offended wing. You coax Beatrix into sitting still with grape slices and soothing chants. You're not sure if the chants are effective, but they make you feel better. Which frankly is half the battle. We're well cared for in many noble households, not just fed and fluffed, but medically treated. You'd think this was limited to prized war horses or hunting hounds, but no. Goose medicine was very real, very weird, and often highly dramatic. Take, for example, the golden poultice, a concoction of mustard seed, egg yolk, and crushed rose petals applied to the feet of geese who walked unevenly. Or the soothing steam tent wherein a goose would sit in a wicker basket beneath a cloth while herbal steam was funneled in to open the lungs. Beatrix gets the modern version, a mild foot rub and a gently warm cloth compress. You whisper encouragements. She stares straight ahead, unmoved, like she's on trike trail. You suspect she's pretending to be sicker than she is. Meanwhile, the steward appears with a copy of Avian Remedies of the Courtly House, a manuscript that smells like mildew and overconfidence. He flips to a page labeled Aches of the Honking Kind. Long, tired look. Still, you follow the recipe. Mash dried nettle. Mix with butter. Apply. Whisper prayer to Saint Frigilus, who may or may not be the patron saint of waterfowl. No one's really sure. As you finish wrapping Beatrix's foot in soft cloth, Clementine begins sneezing. Yes, sneezing. You panic mildly. The steward panics majorly. Lady Matilde orders quarantine protocol. You herd Clementine to the isolation pen, basically the corner of the coop, with nicer straw and fewer judgmental looks. You prepare a herbal broth, warm water thyme, a touch of mead for courage, and 2 gooseberries. Clementine sips with great dignity, then sneezes directly into your face. It's fine. Everything is fine. You update the bird medical ledger, another of your new responsibilities. Entries today include Beatrix, limping left foot, condition improving, mood demanding, Clementine, sneezing, condition dramatic, appetite undeterred, Hubert, perfect health. Well behaved. That last entry worries you most. You investigate. Hubert is indeed healthy, but you find him standing beside a tipped-over sack of powdered ginger. He honks, loudly. The flowery trail leads to your herbal cabinet. You sigh. He's stolen 3 sprigs of mint and a jar of dried sage. He's either making soup or planning a coup. You confiscate the herbs. He pecks your shoe. The usual. Despite the chaos, you notice something comforting. The geese trust you. Beatrix lets you lift her wing without fuss. Clementine leans her head against your arm during a nap. Even Fern, nervous little thing, offers you a single warm egg, likely as a peace offering or a form of quiet gossip. Historically, goose health was a sign of status. Sick birds meant mismanagement. A limping gander at a feast was an omen. Some households kept detailed goose care logs, complete with dates, remedies, and drawings. Steward even recorded which songs calmed which birds. His top 3 lute solos, distant bells, and anything hummed with biscuits in hand. You try humming. It works. Beatrix relaxes. The sneeze crisis passes. Clementine returns to her coop with a dramatic flourish and a slightly shinier beak. The steward applauds. You go lie down in the hay and reconsider your career choices. Sleepy trivia of the medicinal kind. One English herbal from 1372 includes a section titled Goose Cures for Man and Beast, which suggests goose fat rubbed on the temples cures headaches. Another says goose breath. Yes, breath can purify the soul. Side note, no evidence this worked. Also, a nobleman once tried to create a scented goose by feeding his flock nothing but herbs. The geese reportedly smelled wonderful. They also became incredibly unpredictable and started chasing musicians. Thought for the night. If your goose lets you touch her foot and doesn't peck you afterward, she either trusts you or she's waiting to do it when you least expect it. Winter is molting. The first snow falls quietly overnight. You wake to a world covered in white. The manor roofs dusted like powdered sugar. The fields muffled under a soft freezing hush. Everything feels still until the honking starts. You step outside, breath puffing in little clouds, and you already know molting season has arrived. It's a yearly tradition that combines the charm of drifting snow with the chaos of every single goose suddenly shedding its feathers like confetti at a very judgmental wedding. You open the coop door, and it's like stepping into a soft explosion. Down clings to every surface. It floats in the air like awkward snowflakes. Fern sneezes and shoots a feather across the room. Beatrix looks offended by her own reflection. Hubert has apparently decided he's not molting. He's reinventing. You grab your broom. Molting is not an illness. It's not a disaster. It's natural. But it is, without exception, inconvenient, especially in winter, when feathers are desperately needed for warmth, for stuffing yourself into warmth. And suddenly they're everywhere, except where they belong. And geese don't take it well. Beatrix is unusually shy, hiding behind straw piles, like a noblewoman caught without her jewelry. Clementine sulks, her once pristine plumage now sticking out in strange angles, like she styled herself in the dark. Fern waddles in anxious zigzags, convinced this is a sign of personal failure. You assure her it's not. She pecks your shin anyway. Even worse, the drafts. Without their usual feather armor, the geese are more sensitive to cold winds, loud noises, and unsolicited poetry. Hubert's current complaint. Lady Matilda has ordered the windows sealed with oilcloth and extra straw delivered. She's even had tiny woolen cloaks sewn for the vulnerable ones. You didn't think you'd see couture for poultry, but here we are. You wrap Fern in her cloak, navy blue, tied under the beak with satin. She honks with confusion, then curls up against a heated stone and visibly sighs. You spend most of the day collecting feathers. Not just sweeping, but gathering. Because molting feathers are still valuable. Some are trimmed and sorted for writing quills. Others are cleaned, fluffed, and stuffed into pillows. Lady Matilda insists her winter slippers contain only first-drop molting down. She swears it's warmer. You have your doubts. Still, you bag the feathers in linen sacks, labeling them by Goose. Beatrix's are longer. Clementine's softer. Hubert's, well, most of his are scattered near the pantry where he molted dramatically after being denied a second helping of cooked squash. Historically, molting mattered. Medieval goose keepers recorded molting patterns like weather charts. The first feather loss of the season was noted sketch, sometimes even named. Nobles watched closely. Early molt could signal changing weather illness, or if you believed in omens, a shift in luck. One 14th century countess claimed she could read fortunes from the shape of molted feathers. She kept a box labeled warnings. You suspect Beatrix would approve. Back at the coop, you inspect the flock. Molting also reveals what feathers often hide: scabs, scrapes, missing tufts. You gently check underwings, brush off debris, and whisper soothing nonsense. Beatrix lets you clean her beak without protest. Clementine dozes with her head tucked. Hubert tries to shove another goose out of a cloak and wear it as a cape. You intervene. By late afternoon, your arms itch from fluff. Your pockets contain more feathers than coins, and your hair has achieved a kind of halo effect you didn't ask for. But the coop is clean. The birds are warm. And the molting, while messy, feels honest. Vulnerability with honking. Sleep comes early in winter. The manor grows quiet. Fires crackle in stone hearths, and the geese huddle together like a mismatched quilt of half-plucked royalty. You spread extra straw and sneak Fern a second blanket. Sleepy facts to soften the season in some regions. Molting geese were given quiet days during which they were not disturbed, sung to, or even looked at directly. One noble even hired a flutist to play soothing melodies of renewal during evening molting hours. The geese ignored him. The flutist cried. Also, in a Bavarian monastery, the arrival of molting was marked with a short poem read aloud in the courtyard. It rhymed. It mentioned dignity. It also mentioned sweeping, frequently. And one final feathered thought: if your goose is missing half her tail and walks like she's auditioning for a tragic opera, don't laugh. That's her winter look. Support her. A beak in the banquet. You're summoned to the great hall at dawn. This is already a bad sign. Lady Matilda, draped in velvet and sipping something suspiciously thick, and green gestures toward the enormous oak dining table, where silver trays glint beneath linen covers, and the cook's staff scurry like caffeinated ants. "We must prepare," she says, voice grave. "The Duke arrives tonight." You nod wisely. Then she adds, "We're serving goose." You freeze, blink, glance out the window toward the coop, then back at her. "Not one of ours," she says, quickly catching your expression. "Obviously." Still, you clutch your feather ledger protectively, just in case. Because tonight is the autumn banquet, and the menu planned weeks in advance and revised hourly includes the most controversial dish of all roast goose. You know what this means. You know how the flock will react. Because every year, like clockwork, someone accidentally says the word banquet near the coop, and Beatrix enters lockdown mode. Clementine paces. Hubert starts hiding food under hay like he's prepping for interrogation. You walk the perimeter with extra feed whispering reassurances. No one believes you. Fern lies flat against the straw, pretending to be a turnip. Let's be clear. Eating goose in the Middle Ages wasn't strange. It was common, especially among the nobility. Goose meat was prized richer than chicken, more flavorful than duck, and conveniently tied to feasts like Michaelmas and Yuletide. Some banquets roasted entire flocks. Others got creative with goose pies, goose liver tarts, and goose in aspic, which sounds like a punishment, frankly. But eating your own geese. Your named geese, unthinkable. In fact, many noble households kept two flocks, the pet geese, who wore ribbons and got foot baths, and the kitchen geese, who did not. You maintain that tradition rigorously. Still, accidents happen. One year, someone almost cooked Fern's cousin. You intercepted the cart just in time. The cook wept. You wept. The goose pooped on a salad. Tonight's goose has arrived from a neighboring estate. It is plump, silent, distantly related to Hubert if the neck markings are accurate. You avoid eye contact. The great hall is decorated with autumn leaves, flickering lanterns, and too many forks. The steward hands you a clipboard with guest names and seating diagrams. You nod as if this affects you. Really? You're scanning for escape routes, just in case the birds crash the party. You take extra care that evening to close the coop gate. You double-check the latch. You even place a calming sprig of rosemary near Beatrix's perch. Then the banquet begins. Lords and ladies arrive in silk and smugness. A bard begins playing a tune called the Ballad of the Crisped Bird. You cringe. Then the servants enter, 3 of them, carrying the main course. The roast goose is enormous. Its wings tucked neatly, its skin glistening. It rests on a bed of apples, rosemary, and judgment. You brace for a reaction. And oh, does it come. From the courtyard, a distant honk. Then another. Then silence. You look at the steward. He looks at you. You both stand. You sprint. Out in the yard, the gate is open. The coop is empty. And marching in perfect formation. Beatrix at the front, Clementine at her side, Hubert wearing what appears to be your handkerchief like a cape. The geese approach the great hall like a delegation. You run alongside them, breathless. Begging, bribing, nothing works. They pause at the steps. You try to block the entrance. Beatrix honks once, firmly. You step aside. Inside, the bard stops playing. Heads turn. Feathers flutter. The geese enter. They circle the banquet table, inspect the silverware, glare at the guests. Beatrix hops onto a side bench and plants herself like a furry magistrate. Clementine surveys the roast goose. Fern glares at a bowl of stuffing. Hubert hops onto the Duke's chair. For 30 very quiet seconds, no one moves. Then the Duke slowly, deliberately raises his goblet. To Brackenmere, he says, and its most discerning residents. Polite laughter follows. Relief. The geese are allowed to inspect the banquet. No pecking, no pooping, just presence. You stand by, ready to intervene. None needed. Afterward, the flock is gently escorted back with a trail of grapes and light flattery. You lock the gate 3 times. Sleepy banquet trivia before bed. One Italian noble once dressed a live goose in velvet and placed it beside the feast as a moral observer. It honked only when someone reached for a 3rd slice. Critics called it deeply moving. The cook called it infuriating. Also in one medieval satire, a goose sues a cook in feathered court accusing him of oversalting her cousin. The story ends with the cook sentenced to a week of eating turnips. And last cozy thought, if a goose stares at you while you're eating dinner, just remember it's not about guilt. It's about judgment. They invented it. The goose that escaped the gallows. Somewhere between the sunrise and your first cup of barley broth, a servant bursts into the courtyard with wild eyes and a shredded scroll. She's gone, he gasps. Beatrix is gone. You drop your broom, and you sprint. Because Beatrix Pride, of the manor face of the banner recent veteran of the banquet standoff, has apparently escaped, and no one knows how, or worse, why. The coop door is intact, no feathers disturbed, no signs of forced entry. Just a single goose-sized gap beneath the back fence, where the ground has been lightly pawed at and disguised with straw. She dug. It's too perfect. You're both worried and oddly impressed. The manor is in disarray. Lady Matilda has declared it a security breach. The steward has dispatched messengers. Cook Gertrude is weeping softly into a sack of flour. You, however, grab your satchel, your walking stick, and Beatrix's favorite grape pouch. Because you know her. She didn't flee. She departed with purpose. The search begins in the orchard. Nothing. The herb garden. Empty save for a single sprig of stolen mint. The churchyard. A faint trail of white feathers leading toward the village. You follow. In the town square, no one seems alarmed. Because here's the truth. Everyone knows Beatrix. She's the goose. She's been in parades, in paintings, possibly in dreams. You ask around. A baker says he saw her waddling east toward the bridge. A boy claims she stopped to drink from the fountain, looked into the water, and sighed. Eventually, you find her. Near the edge of the field, perched atop a mossy stump, backlit by golden morning sun, Beatrix sits. She is not lost. She is thinking. You sit beside her quietly. A few feet away, a woodcutter's cart is parked, empty but stained with blood. A reminder of what might have happened had you not intervened last year. Because once not so long ago, Beatrix was on the list. Not the performance list. Not the breeding list. The butcher's list. It had been a mistake. A clerk with smudged ink. A steward too tired. A cook looking for a plump one. Beatrix, then unproven and unknown, had been selected. You remember it clearly. You'd read the list. Your eyes had caught her name, misspelled but unmistakable. You'd run, intervened, swapped her tag with a different goose, risked a lashing, lied convincingly, and Beatrix had lived. That was before the banner, before the parades, before she became Beatrix. Now sitting beside her again, you wonder, does she remember? She honks softly, then places one foot forward and begins to walk home. It's a slow march, regal like a queen choosing her return. Villagers pause, bow. One old woman tosses dried berries at her feet. Beatrix doesn't break stride. Back at the manor, Lady Matilda cries actual tears. I was so worried, she says, hugging a feather. She's irreplaceable. You nod. Later over broth, the steward asks if you ever found out why she left. You shrug. You know why. She went to see the place she escaped. To remind herself. To remind you. Maybe even to forgive you for that one time you made her wear bells. Historically, such tales sound fictional, but they aren't. Goose pardons were real. In some noble households, certain animals were officially excused from consumption. Not pets, not performers, just protected. Some even wore a badge of reprieve, a red ribbon, a carved medallion, or a stamped scroll. One famous example is the poultry pardon of Devonshire, where a goose named Penelope was spared execution after divine intervention. He sits, biting the cook so hard he couldn't walk. She lived another 6 years, received visitors, honked at bishops. Beatrix now bears a copper ring on her leg. It reads simply, exempt. She struts differently now. Hubert is furious. Clementine is quietly supportive. Fern tells everyone, you tuck the parchment tag back into your satchel, and you smile. Sleepy goose trivia tonight. In a few monastic communities, geese were seen as divine messengers and were released rather than eaten to carry prayers into the sky. One monk claimed his goose flew away during Vespers and returned a week later with a new feather pattern. He called it a miracle. Others called it molting. Also in France, a goose once served as a court mascot after escaping 5 consecutive feasts. She was named Survivante. She lived to be 17, had her own chair, and one final honk before dreams if a goose ever walks away from you. Silently, don't follow too fast. They might just need to remember they're free. Songs of the Goose Herder. It's early morning and you're humming. Not because you're happy your boots are wet. The coop smells like fermented barley, and Fern just pecked your finger out of pure principle, but because sometimes singing is all you've got. You're walking the flock out to pasture the sky, still blushing with dawn, when Beatrix pauses and looks back. She doesn't honk, she just waits. You hum louder. She nods. The others follow. And there it is again, that strange truth you've come to live by geese respond to music. Not all geese, not all music. But your flock, your birds, they have preferences. Fern likes lullabies. Clementine enjoys long, low notes sung like Gregorian chants. Hubert naturally prefers drums or anything that resembles conflict. Beatrix, she likes stories. Set to melody, especially the ones you make up as you go. So you sing. Not beautifully, not even on key, but with rhythm and care and just enough nonsense to keep the day moving forward. It's an old tradition, older than most barns. Goose herders have been singing for centuries, not for entertainment, but for survival. To soothe the birds, to pass the time, to mask the sheer tedium of walking 5 miles behind animals who stop every 12 seconds to investigate a beetle. And sometimes, just sometimes, the songs are the only thing keeping you sane. You make up verses on the spot. Oh, the gander's got a scandal, and the gosling's got a scheme, but I've got muddy trousers and a barley biscuit dream. Hubert honks. You take that as applause. You reach the far pasture, the one with the small hill that catches the breeze. The geese scatter into grazing patterns, murmuring low to each other in a chorus of contentment. You sit on your usual rock, unwrap your breakfast bread jam, questionable cheese, and begin tuning your voice. Because the geese expect a performance. It's not all whimsy, though. In some parts of Europe, singing to livestock was considered not just common, but essential. Farmers sang to cows, whispered to sheep, and yes, hummed lullabies to geese. The songs passed down through generations. Some were silly, some were sacred. One was reportedly so powerful, it made an entire flock sit down in unison. You've tried it. Your geese just sneezed. There's even a 14th century tract titled On the Harmonies of Husbandry, which recommends specific melodies for different animals. For geese, something called the barley croon in a minor key. You don't know what that sounds like, but it probably ends with you being pecked slightly less. Back in the field, you try a new song. Beatrix, oh Beatrix, brave with every stride. Feathers sharp as noble pens with Hubert at her side. Marching through the orchard lane, dignity and fluff. Unless she finds a puddle, then she's had quite enough. You get a honk, 2 flaps, and 1 small pile of goose droppings directly on your left boot, which honestly is better feedback than most musicians get. By noon, you've drafted 3 full songs, 2 half ones, and a chant called "Do Not Bite the Tailor Again." You're considering writing them down. Maybe make a little goose herder songbook. You imagine the cover, a carved wooden goose, mid-honk musical notes above her head. Inside, lyrics footnotes, and possibly some herbs pressed between pages. You title it Ballads of the Feathered Folk, or maybe Tunes for honks and hiccups. You laugh to yourself. And then Clementine starts humming. Not really, but she lets out a series of low rhythmic sounds as she waddles in step with your latest verse. You hum back. Fern joins in with a weird 2-tone peep. It's not music exactly, but it is something, a connection, a call and response, a moment between worlds. Sleepy trivia for your tune-filled dreams. In parts of Scotland, herders sang to their geese during moonlit walks. To keep foxes away, the song wards off more than sleep, one old journal notes. In Hungary, a lullaby called "Honking Moon" was sung to goslings at hatching. The lyrics translate roughly to "come out of your shell, but take your time, the world is weird." Also, a noble court once hired a minstrel solely to perform for a favorite goose during mealtimes. He was paid in bread and complaint letters. And one final note, to hum yourself to sleep if a goose walks beside you and honks softly in time with your singing "Don't Stop." That's a duet. Treasure it. Royal feather contracts. You're in the middle of sweeping the coop again when the steward bursts in, waving a scroll so aggressively that even Hubert flattens against the hay in alarm. "We've received a commission," the steward announces, chest puffed with self-importance. "From the royal household." You freeze. You squint at the seal on the scroll. Yes, it's real. The King's Falconer has issued a formal contract for Brackenmere's finest feathers. And just like that, your humble, muddy, occasionally ridiculous job has become a matter of state importance. The request is specific. Only secondary flight feathers, clean white or silvery gray, only minimum of 3 dozen bundled in groups of 12, must be of noble origin and temperament, whatever that means. Delivered within 9 days. You look at Beatrix. She blinks slowly. Clementine stares at the scroll like she's trying to read the fine print. Hubert immediately tries to eat it. Welcome to the world of royal feather contracts. You spend the afternoon selecting your candidates. Not every goose makes the cut. Fern too small, Jasper too molty. Clementine, excellent structure, but she's already halfway through winter fluff. You finally settle on Beatrix, naturally a quiet elder named Margot, and a surprisingly cooperative goose named Plum. Now comes the hard part, harvesting. No, not plucking. That would be barbaric. You collect molted feathers, the ones naturally shed, and sort them meticulously, by length, by curve, by color tone. Each one held up to the light like a jewel. The steward watches you work and mutters things like, "That one's regal, and does this curve speak of loyalty?" You don't argue. You're too focused on the task. Because this isn't just for pillows or cloaks. These feathers will be turned into quills, ink-dipped parchment skimming tools of royal decree. Declarations, edicts, love letters maybe. You imagine some future scroll written with Beatrix's feather. It probably says something like, "Raise taxes and feed the hounds." You hope not. Historically, goose feathers were the gold standard for writing quills in the medieval world. The best ones came from the left wing for right-handed scribes. They were dried, trimmed hardened over heat, and sold at a premium. A high-quality quill could last weeks longer if the goose was known for consistency. Yes, some scribes had favorite geese they never met. Some courts went further. Royal scribes kept ledgers tracking feather batches, who provided them what kind of parchment they worked best on how they responded to different inks. One record from 1423 praises a quill made from Giselle, of northern pluck, whose flight bore the treaties of 3 cities. You spend hours sorting trimming, wrapping the selected feathers in linen and sealing them in a carved wooden case lined with dried mint. It smells faintly of parchment dust and the faint tension of responsibility. Lady Matilda insists on including a note from the flock of Brackenmere, loyal in beak and banner. You add your own note in tiny letters on the inside of the box lid. Please don't let these become tax documents. The steward hands the parcel off to a royal courier. He rides off into the snowy dusk, and the courtyard feels proud, quiet, accomplished. Then Hubert bites the steward's shoe, balance restored. The next day, the coop is buzzing. Beatrix struts like a celebrity. Fern won't stop asking questions. Even Margot seems to walk with new purpose. You can't blame them. They're not just geese anymore. They're royal suppliers. Sleepy feather trivia to dream on a single goose can produce up to 20-30 usable quills per year. The most prized were from birds raised calmly fed well and never stressed. A calm goose makes a steady line. Also in 15th century Spain, a royal scribe insisted his ink only touch feathers of honor, which excluded any bird known for chasing children. Records show the rule was broken at least once. The document, a treaty with Portugal. The quill, allegedly Hubert. And a final cozy quill, thought if your goose gives you a perfect feather and then walks away without honking, it's not indifference, that's trust. Write something worthy with it. The last goose. Standing. It's spring again. The snow has melted into muddy pathways. The orchard smells like blossoms and damp earth. And the geese, well, they're molting again, of course. You've swept the coop so many times the floorboards are starting to know your gait by heart. But something feels different this year. Beatrix is slower. Not frail exactly, just dignified in a way that suggests she's aware she's become legendary. She doesn't rush for grapes anymore. She waits. She expects. Clementine still keeps order. Fern still panics. Hubert is against all odds, more mellow, only biting twice last week. Progress. But the others? Many are gone. Some passed quietly over the winter. Others were gifted to visiting nobles. A few were retired to a peaceful estate near the river, where they now honk at fish and refuse to eat anything but poached turnip. And so it is your flock is smaller now, but somehow sharper, focused. Lady Matilde calls it the golden clutch. You call it what remains. One morning, as you count beaks and refill the grain bucket, the steward pulls you aside. He hands you a sealed scroll, another request, not for feathers, not for performance, for Beatrix. A duke's household is assembling a heritage aviary, a polite term for a goose sanctuary with guest access and embroidered signage. They want her, not for show but for honor, as a figure of historic importance. She'd live out her days in luxury, daily brushing, herbal baths, grapes imported from the south, visitors whispering, poets writing bad odes about her, maybe even a statue. You fold the scroll. You look at Beatrix. She's standing alone on the low wall, staring across the yard wings, slightly flared in the breeze, like a creature remembering the first time she learned how to balance. You don't tell her yet. Instead, you walk beside her, quietly, like you have every morning for years. Past the well, past the roses, toward the pasture, where she once led her first formation, back when she still startled at her own reflection. She walks slow, but proud, and you realize she's the last of the originals, the last from that frantic spring when you inherited this job full of bruises and confusion, the last from the banquet march, the heraldry unveiling, the diplomatic goose exchanges, the feather contract, the feast she nearly ruined on purpose. She's not just your goose, she's the story. You sit on the stone bench near the hedge, and she hops beside you, a little wobbly. She tucks her feet, blinks at the sun, and falls asleep. You don't move for an hour. That night, you write a reply to the Duke's steward. Thank you for the offer. But Beatrix has already found her legacy. She's home. You seal it. And you bring Beatrix a grape. The next day, Fern tries to honk in charge. Clementine glares her into silence. Hubert stands quietly by the gate, like a bouncer deciding who gets in. You open the coop door. Beatrix steps forward. She leads them again. Not quickly, not perfectly, but still. Historically, animals fade from records. Names lost. Feathers forgotten. But some geese leave marks in paintings and poems, in footnotes, scribbled by tired scribes, who note the gander with good timing, or the hen who never blinked. Beatrix will be remembered, because you remember. Sleepy trivia as the sky turns silver. In an English village, a stone marker stands beneath an apple tree. It bears no name, only a carved feather and the words, "She watched. She waited. She honked." No one knows whose goose it was, but everyone knows she mattered. Also, one goose in Burgundy was said to have lived 21 years. The last entry in her ledger reads, "Still suspicious, still dignified, still here." And one last breath of thought. If your goose stands alone at sunset and doesn't look back, don't worry. She knows the way home. The Great Feather Rebellion. It begins fittingly, not with a honk, but with a silence. A thick, feathery stillness hangs over the yard. You step outside with your usual morning bucket of grain, whistling the first few bars of the barley march, expecting the usual chaos flapping, jostling one goose, pecking another before breakfast. But no, they're all lined up, in formation, waiting. You stop. Slowly lower the bucket. Narrow your eyes. Beatrix front and center stands unmoving. Clementine and Fern to her left. Hubert, oh Hubert, smirking on the right, wearing one of your socks like a bandolier. And just behind them, a banner, made of straw twine, and possibly someone's nightgown with one single word scratched in mud enough. You stare at them, they stare at you. Welcome to the Great Feather Rebellion. Of course, it's not truly a rebellion in the human sense. There are no flaming torches or thrown turnips. But if you've spent long enough among geese, you know this is coordinated, calculated, mutiny by fluff. It started, you suspect, when Lady Matilda proposed spring rehearsals for an upcoming feast. The plan. A synchronized goose dance around a rose trellis while minstrels played lute. Beatrix blinked once, and then it began. The refusals, the non-honks, the passive-aggressive molting, the carefully timed poop near the steward's boots. One by one, they staged a slow, elegant refusal of duty. It wasn't rage, it was exhaustion. Years of parades, of noble guests and velvet collars, of being symbols, diplomats, defenders, and feathered owners. And now, they were done. You try reasoning, you still have honor, you whisper. Legacy, grapes. Hubert pecks the side of the grain bucket. Clementine kicks over the water trough. Beatrix simply turns her back. It's official. The flock is on strike. Historically, this would not be without precedent. In the 15th century, the town of Melcombe reported a mass avian refusal, where 24 geese refused to march during the spring procession. The town clerk wrote, "The birds did not go. We pleaded. They napped." Another record from Bavaria details a feathered standoff where noble geese refused to eat until their hay was fluffed by a particular servant. His name was Hans. He was 17. He cried. You call an emergency coop meeting. You bring grapes, warm water, soft hay. You apologize for the performances, the cloaks, the misguided idea of dyeing Clementine's wingtips rose gold. That was a low point. You lower yourself to the straw eye level with Beatrix. What do you want, you ask? She blinks, turns her head, then waddles toward the gate. One by one they follow. You walk after them, silent, uncertain. They lead you not to the pasture, not to the coop, but to the hill, the one behind the orchard, the one where the wind is strongest and the grass grows wild. And there they sit, no performances, no scrolls, just breeze and space and dignity. You understand. And so you declare the rebellion won. The geese retire officially. Their work is done. No more pageants. No more feather quotas. No more nobles pointing at their posture while nibbling on salted pears. Lady Matilda, to her credit, agrees. She commissions a small wooden plaque to the honorable flock of Brackenmere, guardians, judges, dancers, survivors, friends. She even hosts a farewell tea. The geese attend. Hubert steals 2 scones. You meanwhile become something else. No longer just a herder. You're now their chronicler. You write their stories. You sing their songs. You record their legacy, one honk at a time. And when visitors pass through and ask, which one is Beatrix, you point to the hill, where a small white feather always seems to catch the breeze at just the right angle. Sleepy trivia. To close this tale, in one corner of an old monastery's wall, there's a carving of a goose wearing a crown and standing on a scroll. No one knows who carved it, but beneath it are the words, "We served, we saw, we soared." Also in the village of Fernfarche, a local festival still honors the day of the walkout. Children dress as geese. They carry signs that read, "Fluff and freedom." There's a pie-eating contest. It's lovely. And one final honk of comfort if a goose ever turns her back on the stage and walks into the wind, let her go. Some legends need to write their own endings. Don't cat. And now, dear listener, it's time to let the feathers settle. The geese have gone quiet. The straw is warm beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a lute plays a tune no one remembers the name of. And even Hubert, our eternal troublemaker, has tucked his beak under wing. You've walked with them through mud and molting parades and politics across scrolls and feathers, laughter and rebellion. You've sung their songs. You've heard their silences. And now, in the hush of the coop, in the comfort of night, it's okay to rest. Because Beatrix is safe on her hill. Clementine watches over the flock. Fern dreams nervous dreams. And you're finally off duty. No one needs herding right now. No scrolls need writing. Just the gentle rhythm of your breath, the soft rustle of straw, and the feeling that somewhere, under starlight and quiet skies, a small, stubborn bird still remembers your voice. You've done well, truly. So go ahead. Close your eyes. Let the barn door creak closed behind your thoughts. You're not alone. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.